still, there's all those other ancillary costs with equipment and training and everything else that goes with it. So is this important? It's absolutely critical to us, kind of supporting the services that we're becoming accustomed to and anticipating, you know, the increases that's gonna come with additional housing and rooftops here in Circleville, so.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I do have those figures from the state of the city. So there are between 75 and 80 miles of roadway throughout the city. Based on today's cost, the city spends approximately $110,000 to repave a quarter of a mile of road. For the same length of road, the city spends approximately $1.5 million to rebuild the road from the base to the driving surface. You have base repair, curb and sidewalk repair, actual road width, environmental issues, and other factors that can affect the numbers. But at 1.5 to rebuild the road from the base to the surface, that's a pretty hefty amount to repave a street when there's 75 to 80 miles of streets within the city limits.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to committee questions for anybody, and then we'll open it up to all of council, because I know several other council members are here. What questions do you have, sir?
Your rationale for you explained about the fire, you explained about the streets, we haven't talked about police. Tell me about that.
I specifically, right now, our fire department has the higher number of people that are at risk. So funding their department is why I separated the two.
And similarly, in prioritization, had we passed the previous levy, that it got 0.25 instead of 0.4 of that 0.5 increase.
I don't know that we divided out how much each department would have
Meaning
gotten.
it didn't necessarily divide out evenly.
Yeah, I don't know.
I guess my opinion is that I totally support the streets, I totally support the fire. I also understand that we are not in the black, if you will. We're not gonna pay all our bills even if we pass this, okay? And just from Ward 4, streets and personnel, I personally would rather see a 0.25 streets and 0.25 fire. And then we'll let we're gonna have to make a decision somewhere, of not everybody getting everything they want, okay? And I think the 0.1 for streets, if we wanna pass this levy, is very, very, very low, in my opinion.
Can you expand on the comment, you said that even if this passes, we still wouldn't pay our bills?
I'm just saying that, do you really think, in other words, are you saying that if we pass a 0.4 for this fire, that they will be fully funded, fully staffed, and this will cover their expenses?
I think that, and please, I think Paul or Michelle, if you want to chime into this, I think one of the things that we have struggled with as a council to understand is what fully funded means. In terms of what does fully staffed mean, how many really is that, how many is it by ordinance? In my time on council, I'm not sure that we have ever staffed fire or police to ordinance. They are grossly under ordinance.
And that's my point.
But I think there's a difference between to ordinance and to a safe level, if that makes sense. I don't think, and again, I'm asking what your guys' feedback is on this, but it's like, I do feel like collectively, the feeling is, if this were to pass, we could get back into what we feel is a safe level of staffing to support the need for the city.
With a lot of other support from the city.
Which it always gets. I mean, she went through, I think, did a very good job of explaining the other funds.
But I'm just saying, we may pass this levy and still be laying people off next year. In other departments. I hope we don't, okay? But I'm just saying, I've never seen us say that we have a comfortable level of income versus, or revenue versus expenses, if you will. And I'm just saying, putting a big hunk of this into the fire, okay?
Other
I'm questioning that, that's all.
Other comments or questions? anyone at council?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. One thing that, we saw recently that Pickaway County has denied construction in Commercial Point. And with all the construction that we have and all the requests that are coming in and so on, where do we draw the line? Because right now, if we can't take care of the future of Circleville, we can't build anymore. And we know, we've got a good thing going and we've had a good thing going, but we're saying we can only take care of what we have right now. How are we gonna take care of any more? And, we pride ourselves on reaching out to folks and working with P3 and so on. But we have some concerns in the future. If we continue to construct homes and more people coming in, we can't take care of almost what we have. That's a big concern in itself. So, I like, obviously things have changed here. You used to be able to get across town and maybe a backup of 5 cars. Now it's steady traffic, even in my neighborhood, where there's all that new build and so on. But it's to a point, it's something we need to think about is, can we continue to open ourselves up for construction? And I'm one, I'm all for, developing the city and so on. Not, I'm not negative about things, but we need to think about it as, what it'll take to take care of these 116 homes out there and save approximately 4 people per home and so on. So there's something else that needs to be discussed.
Yeah, and I think your point's really valid, and I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we have as a city, because how do you balance, and I say this somewhat in jest, but honestly somewhat seriously, when you have people who constantly say we want a steakhouse, well, we've been told many, many times that in order to get a steakhouse or the like to this community, you need to add rooftops. And so to add rooftops, well, okay, great, that's what's gonna attract these investors to come in, and I think that's all great, and if that's what people want, fine. But to your point, how do we sustain the services that we provide and that we have a responsibility to provide to the city?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally clarify a point. Commercial Point was water and sewage. Okay?
We have that.
That's, I'd like to
We
continue,
have that.
if I may continue. We have twice the water, twice the sewage we need. We just put $38 million in probably a state-of-the-art plant. So therefore, I'm less concerned about the fire department, if you will, than our current status with water and sewage, which are excellent. And therefore, I'm not sure we need to stop building new construction because of fire levy.
On the other side of it though is all of this traffic beats up our roads. Every time we add a new vehicle, a new truck comes through, whatever be the case, that's tearing up the streets,
Amen, brother.
to say it. So all of that coming together, there's no, I think, best solution in this whole situation, because one takes care of the other, it doesn't take care of the other either. So we've got a lot of things to consider. Certainly having, the additional funds will help. But we know, the fire department is running all the time these days. Consider what it used to be. It used to be pretty quiet in the city, but it's not anymore. So the numbers, obviously from 2019 to 2025, have gone through the roof and so on. And we're still trying to take care of with monies basically equivalent to what we started with years ago. And so we need money, period. But we've got a lot of things to consider.
Thank you. Other comments from other members of council in the audience?
You had presented the figures of what it costs to pave
Yeah.
for.
Can you come up to the podium just so
Oh,
everyone
okay.
can hear it and for those viewing it?
You had presented what, just a quarter of a street would cost. If you could present that of what it was before 2019, the cost of comparison, so people see the cost of concrete, that might be really helpful. The other is regarding the ordinance of the commuter tax, from 2014, 2016. Is it possible that you can present a new vote for that, for the
So-
commuter tax, or?
I think the legal question becomes, is that's attached to a permanent levy? So do we have to undo the permanent levy? And so that is a legal argument that will have to be addressed. And so that's what makes this
a little more difficult. It was not an independent item on the ballot. It was literally attached to the same paragraph, same issue. It was all one issue resolved in the ballot.
But even with that understanding of what might that figure look like as we grow and become more of a bedroom community of commuting, you know, I mean, that's something
So-
that people will be asking. I know.
And I think that's the other issue, the risk is that is our major source of funding right now. So I think that those are options that the city has been having, I think, in every aspect to try to figure out whether or not that is doable, but at this point in time, there's a lot of legal ramifications that have to
Yeah.
reach
So
out
thank
through.
you. Well, it was good research to find out. The other is, it was presented that we are only growing at a 2.5% here in this community, and without the new housing that's coming in, for people to need to paint out what it really would look like if we don't grow, how much of a greater tax burden, and even how much more services we would be cut without the growth. And I don't know if there's a way of presenting that, because we will even have fewer police and fire if we don't grow. So, thank you.
Thank you. Other comment? Oh, sorry, did you?
Yeah, I wanted to touch on, John, go ahead.
Okay. What I want to know is, we just talked briefly on when it would, if we passed it, when is it going to be funded? How long is it going to take to be funded, and how are we going to cover that transition into the budgets moving forward? So-
Yeah, so historically, the levy fund has taken about 3 years, or the estimate is 3 years for a levy to be fully funded. Since we would be starting from scratch, there would be a little of a transition period.
Has that been accounted for? Do we know how we're going to cover that gap between March for the SAFER grant, and then if it would, and then moving forward?
So based on, we haven't specifically put numbers to that, but we do know what the projected revenue would be over that period of time for this amount from RETA. And so we could put that into our revenue projections. The budget that I asked for from the administration was just expenses. It wasn't revenue, but there aren't really any additional revenue sources that we're bringing into the city.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
I want to go back to the infrastructure, and thanks, Tom, for pointing this out. I think one of the issues that we saw in other communities was the infrastructure that you think of with water and sewer and roads. We have roads, albeit some have holes, some are in further disrepair than others, but we do have water and sewer capacity to withstand the additional addition of housing. That is one of the first things that we talk about when we talk about a housing development, is what are those utilities what is the reach of the utilities, how does it get there, what is even the flow of that, because pressure has to be considered too. So Jim and Brian are considered and consulted with when we look at these housing developments. When we look at housing developments, we do look at other infrastructure, schools, and safety forces. We use projections that are provided to us by people who do this for a living. They work with these developers, they work in the economic development space to project how much revenue would be brought into the hospital and the restaurants and all of the other ancillary services of revenue that would be brought to this community when we consider these housing developments. And one of those, and it's a fair point, is to consider safety forces. And I think up until this point, part of that conversation has been the commuter tax, because we know that a portion of these people who are going to be coming and living in these houses are going to be working outside of the city, but not everybody will necessarily have to work outside of the city. So there will be a portion of that, the income from these houses, that will stay here. And we we could see. Now, I don't know I don't know how to project that, and I will ask for those numbers to try to project what that income is. You know, if a percentage of those people work and live here, for that income tax specifically. But Hannah, you're here tonight as our city planner. If you wanna talk about some of the conversations that we've had, specifically surrounding housing and what that looks like as we consider the budget.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we've been working on a lot to absorb the impact of all the new developments coming is the NCA. So we will be bringing in additional revenue strictly from the new houses that are coming in through that. That's the 8 mills that's gonna go on the property taxes for all new houses. It will not all come at once. That pretty much is gonna go on like once the house is built and sold. But that will build up over time to help support the new houses. But I think it's important to have this levy now to kind of make up for the shortfalls that we have right now, and then the NCA can help support new development moving forward.
Good.
Thank
Yeah, it's got crisis in the meantime.
Michelle, just to pick up on one of your points, I was really impressed when Jim gave a presentation of all the engineering work. We know what streets are what, when to fix them, how soon, criticality. We also have what, 0.4, this is a permanent street levy. So with only 0.1, and you see how the critical nature of our streets are now, and we're gonna add 25% more to what we're currently using, it's gonna be insignificant, I fear.
I think the important thing to remember though is I hear what you're saying, and I think your point is valid. I think it's very important though that people hear that in the absence of a safety levy, as she has proposed it, which doesn't have to be as it happens, but as she has proposed it, in the absence of that passing, it's a $1.2 million cut.
Absolutely, absolutely, I totally support, if you hear anything other than that, I totally support putting a levy on the ballot, okay?
Other comments, questions from anyone in the audience, council, anybody else? Okay, so to recap the ask tonight, there are 2 pieces of legislation on the actual agenda. One is a resolution, one is an ordinance. I'm gonna let the law director speak to what both of those are. But the ask is that we pass this through this committee with the recommendation for passage, that it would then go to council as a whole, where it would ultimately be passed or not passed, decided on by the full council group. The concern is obviously at this point, the timing behind it. I think we're all in agreement, council as a whole, that if a levy were to happen, regardless of what it looks like, it needs to be happening quickly, if the assumption is that it would go on the November ballot. So that is the ask tonight. Kendra, do you mind speaking to the difference between the resolution and the ordinance?
So these are counterintuitive, I think, because normally when we think of a resolution, it's short term, and normally an ordinance, we think it's longer. So they're actually in reverse. So the ordinance is your power and authority to submit the levy to the electors. Under Ohio Revised Code, that lies solely within the municipality's powers to do so. So with that being said, the ordinance needs to be read and determined first. And then what that ordinance does is if it's passed, then it directs council to pass a resolution to be submitted to the Board of Elections for placement on the ballot. So as you will see when you go through the ordinance, there's multiple things that needed to be addressed. Obviously, this is an increase from the permanent levy that has been on through the 1988, and then the one that started 2015 that passed in 2014 that got us to the 2%. Obviously, then in 2019, that levy has fallen off the books. So this section is amending some of the things that the 19 section amended, i.e. the allocation of how the tax levy is spent. And then on further, then it goes to add and to amend section 192 of the codified ordinances, which deal with the permanent levies as they stand now. So then essentially that'll give the breakout. Now, I will tell you it's wordy, and the reason it's wordy is there are specific things that we can hold a levy for. And specifically, it's very generic when it comes to streets, but it is very detail oriented when it comes to a fire or an EMS levy that outlines everything that can be spent on. So when you see all of that language, don't get all tied up. A lot of that is pursuant to the Ohio Revised Code. So then essentially, if the ordinance passes in its form, it is reflective of what the mayor is asking for. So essentially that would be of that 2.5%, the additional 0.5%, 0.4 would be allocated to fire, and then the 0.1 to the streets. And then once that would hit council floor and be accepted, then there is a resolution directing the Board of Elections to place this on the ballot with the ballot language. Just as let's review, I have in a draft form submitted that ballot language to the Board of Elections just to make sure that there are no tie-ups on our end if they're not in agreement with the language. Obviously, this is still conditioned on this being passed and the formal resolution being presented to the Board of Elections. But I want everybody to know that there's also a side step to make sure that they are in approval of that language, as suggested by the Ohio Revised Code.
Thank you. So before we ask Melissa to read both of these, I do want to recap that even if this were to get moved forward from our committee to council, it doesn't necessarily mean it passes. It would give council as a whole the opportunity to vote on it and to discuss it. We did advertise that this meeting was happening quite a while ago, so we gave everyone the opportunity to come so we could participate in the discussion. We had Jeff, who had a prior commitment, and then our other council person did come in at the end. So all of council is here with the exception of Jeff, and I know Sherry missed some of it, but we have had the opportunity to talk about it. In the event that this moves forward to council and this would be held for its first reading next Tuesday, obviously it would give council the option to have a larger discussion if things were not said today or we didn't have the opportunity to say what they wanted to. I assume if there are questions that anybody has prior to the meeting, we'd like those submitted so we could all come prepared on Tuesday.
Yes, please.
Any other questions, comments before we ask Melissa to read?
Yeah, I have a question for the law director.
Yes, sir.
We do not have quorum if I don't support this. I do not support the 4 and the 10% and 40%. Can we just simply say for safety, for the fire department and for the streets, taking the percentages out? That way we can discuss it at council and I can, with good conscience, put it forward to council.
One good question, one clarifying question though. We had a finance committee where we actually had no participants come outside of myself, and I was able to move it forward as the chair. Is that possible or no? Because I was surprised by that when it happened, so good question. I don't know.
Unfortunately, my vote will negate yours.
At this point,
I would like to move it forward, okay? I really would. But I want to move it forward with good conscience from me.
at this point, I think it was factually different when you were the only one. There are 2 people here,
Yeah.
so I think that is going to pose the problem.
Okay. So let's read it, knowing how it's gonna go, and we will, sounds like not moving
You're
forward.
saying we really can't adjust that?
I'm not saying we can't, I guess that's the other thing, and if I'm being instructed to create another ordinance for council
We
consideration.
could just put an amendment on it to say we'd like to keep those 2.
Sorry, clarify, what are you saying?
I'm suggesting we have in the past, when an ordinance needed fixed, we could do an amendment to it.
Correct, but I need to know what's being proposed. So is there a counter proposal?
I'm suggesting that we simply do not put percentages there, but rather we want to support with this levy, the police department and the streets.
You want the police instead of the fire?
I'm so sorry, I'm not having a good night. The fire,
Okay,
EMS, everything, I thought you did a very nice presentation, thank you for all the work you've done, I totally support it. I just would like to change the percentages. Or
All
at
right,
least
so
give us
here's
the opportunity.
here's
to
what
do
I
that.
would propose. We can present this to council floor. I can do a second copy with the percentages blank to address formally on council floor. I don't like sending that's way open-ended for me, if that makes sense.
can't we, go with me on this,
Sure.
can't we make a recommendation to move it forward as it's written and it get changed on council floor?
It can.
But I can't support it.
Well, let's go ahead and read it, Melissa. You could read A for us.
So you're saying you're not comfortable leaving those blanks on saying, law director?
So she said ordinance needs to go first.
Oh, hold on, sorry, go ahead.
You're saying you are not comfortable putting the second ordinance in front of council with the blanks? Is that-
No, I would rather, if that's the case, then I want, you guys don't have to vote for passage, you can send it to council for further evaluation. Does that make sense? We don't always have a recommendation for passage. So, the question becomes, you can send it to council floor for further evaluation. I can ancillary, if you authorize and vote on it now, I can also send a blank percentage to council floor to be filled in and addressed by council.
But we would do that through the exercise of voting.
Correct, you would have to move to amend that to physically put those in on council floor and it would take that full vote.
So the amendment would happen on council floor.
And what is the percentage of vote that would have to pass because it has an emergency?
It's got an emergency clause, but best practice is 3 readings.
So you need 4 to 7.
4 out of 7.
It's 2/3. It's 2/3 vote.
Okay,
I'm sorry, we were talking.
It's 2/3 vote.
you would need 2/3 votes, so you need 5.
Okay, thank you.
It's for passage and dinner.
Okay, so let's read it. Melissa, do you wanna read, we're gonna start with B, which is the ordinance piece, and then we're gonna do A.
An ordinance of the city of Circleville so as to increase the city income tax rate from the current rate of 2% to a rate 2.5% to become effective January 1st, 2026 with 1/10 of 1% of the increase to be allocated for the purpose of general construction, reconstruction, resurfacing, and repair of the streets, roads, and bridges necessary in the city of Circleville, and 4/10 of 1% to be allocated for the purpose of providing and maintaining fire apparatus, mechanical resurrectors, underwater rescue and recovery equipment or other fire equipment and appliances, buildings and sites, therefore, or sources of water supply and materials, therefore, for the establishment and maintenance of lines of fire alarm, communications for the payment of firefighting companies or permanent part-time or volunteer firefighting emergency medical services, including the payment of any employer contributions required for such personnel under section 145.48 or 742.34 of the revised code, for the purchase of ambulance equipment, for the provisions of ambulances, paramedic, or other emergency medical services operated by a fire department or firefighting company, or for the payments of other related costs, to direct the Pickaway County Board of Elections to submit this ordinance to the electors of the city and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Melissa. So we've heard the ordinance piece of this, and it would go to council for review on June 3rd, which is a week from this evening. Is there a motion?
With clarification. So you will have a presentation to council with blanks.
If you are directing me and an ancillary to provide a blank ordinance with the blank percentages, but it still says the same language, we're just changing
Numbers.
the allocation, we're still dealing with a 0.5, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. If it's just the allocation of the 0.5, then yes, I think that can be adjusted on council floor.
And then from the chairman of this committee, you can explain the fact that we're casting it through for us to discuss, not necessarily recommending these numbers. Are you comfortable with that?
I'm comfortable with that clarification because I'm not in agreement with your suggestion. So I'm fine to make it blank and to have it further discussed forward.
Perfect.
Okay, so you made a motion to move it forward. I will second that. Can we please do a roll call?
Hedges,
Yes,
Duval.
Yes.
thank you. All right, and now can we read what was A on the agenda?
A resolution to submit to the electors at the primary election to be held on the 4th day of November 2025, an ordinance to increase the city income tax rate from the current rate of 2% to a rate of 2.5% to become effective January 1st, 2026 by allocating 1/10 of 1% of the increase for the purpose of general construction, reconstruction, resurfacing, and repair of the streets and roads and bridges necessary in the city of Circleville and allocating 0.4% for the purpose of providing and maintaining fire apparatus, mechanical resurrectorators, underwater rescue and recovery equipment or other fire equipment and appliances, buildings and sites therefore, or sources of water supply and materials therefore, for the establishment and maintaining of lines of fire alarm communications, for the payment of firefighting companies or permanent, part-time, or volunteer firefighting, emergency medical service, administrative, or communications personnel, to operate the same, including the payment of any employer contribution required for such personnel under section 145.48 or 742.334 of the revised code for the purchase of ambulance equipment, for the provision of ambulance, paramedic, or other emergency medical services operated by a fire department or firefighting company, or for the payment of other related costs, to direct the Pickaway County Board of Elections to submit this tax ordinance to the electors of the city and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, ma'am. So that is the resolution portion of this. Is there a recommendation with alteration?
Sure.
So moved by Tom Duval for the same change to make, basically the percentages blank, to move forward for council on June 3rd for further consideration. Motions by Tom Duval, second, please do roll call.
Hedges,
Yes,
Duval.
Yes.
thank you. So that concludes the agenda portion of our, the action item of our agenda this evening. To reiterate, this will go to council for further discussion next Tuesday, June 3rd. I would ask and challenge all council members, if you have questions, comments, need further information prior to council, please give adequate time for that information to be gathered. And also, just keep in mind that obviously this is a big discussion and a big decision that we have to make. I would also challenge all council members, if you don't support the levy as it's written, please come with another idea, because we are running short on time. That is all. We have housekeeping items that was left on here as a whole placeholder for the auditor who's not here, so I assume there's nothing to be discussed in that regard. Any older other